Streaming live on Facebook with Jazz Cabbage Cafe. All right.
Are we? Good.
We are.
Okay. I'm turning this back over to Colin, and Jazz Cabbage Cafe is here, and I'm sure we'll be joined by some more.
There's Jim.
Jim Salam has joined us. Colin is now officially the host again. World's coming together.
Hello.
We're here with Rick. Hopefully we'll get Deb. That was a little bit up in the air. I was kind of optimistic because she's doing a little bit better, but still a little dragged down over this experience of having that injury and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll hear from her at some point. That would be pretty cool. And today we might not broadcast as long, and today we're not in the studio, but it's going to be pretty cool today. There's a lot going on. It's going to be the first time we haven't interviewed a political candidate in several weeks, but today's the day where we find out, who's going to get to move on into the general. And I'm hoping that a lot of the people who we have supported and interviewed and heard about their stance in a favorable way on our issue get to get those decision-making spots. It can only help us out, especially the possibility of getting the prosecutors in Washtenaw, Wayne, and Oakland to all evolve a half a notch at least for us. Would be great to have that all at once. And as one of our former guests for a candidate for Wayne County prosecutor Victoria, Burton Harris said, and then if Macomb could come online too, that would be really strong for this region. So today's going to have a lot of answers for us, and that'll be interesting. Of course, we're not going to know until tonight, and then maybe even thereafter, depending on how counts of all the record amounts of mail-in voting has taken place, which is also a unique thing about this election and that kind of stuff. But Rick has got some stuff to say later on. We mentioned on Medical Mondays last night that we had some good stuff to talk about, some reports on some activist activity with the Democratic Cannabis Caucus, some other stuff going on. And today is going to be a little bit, we're going to talk about the politics and stuff, but we have to let that process play out and see what's going on. And we can certainly discuss who we want to win, and as that comes up, but we're kind of going to return to a cannabis discussion on a lot of levels besides just the news that's going on and everything. We're going to have a conversation about cultivation. We're not going to get right to that segment yet, but we have a guest here today who's an expert in that regard and has helped out many individual growers as well as some larger commercial projects and things like that, and has done it many different places. So I wanted to, I was kind of hoping the Medical Monday guys were going to come by, because inspired from the show last night, I'm kind of wondering where people are with their view of the quality of Michigan cannabis. If you've been able to experience it outside of the state, if you have primarily used it within the state, but it's it's meeting all expectations, and you've seen the growth of the development of our system here and the more consistent quality that have come out over the years, as more and more people have learned to properly grow, and the ability to teach people and to have products available and to consult with people when necessary have been more available. I think we've gotten some recognition worldwide, but I'm just interested to hear some thoughts on people's experience here with Michigan cannabis, particularly if it can be compared to trying things out in other places.
Possibly the most traveled member of the group right now is Jim Salam. You've got a lot of miles underneath you. You've experienced a lot of different cannabis. What do you think?
I think it's gotten better over the last couple months, but the first year or so of, I guess in the last year, I've seen kind of a dip.
And you're kind of primarily viewing commercial grade cannabis.
It's all, I'm strictly speaking of commercial here.
Okay.
And that's, it back in the day before, we got regulated. I think we saw a lot more of the, the growers that really take their time with their plants and help individually like stress their plants and do the things that help, get it sticky. And the moisture levels, I think, are the biggest problem because most of the stuff comes to you and it's dried out now. It doesn't leave that stickiness to your fingers after you're done rolling it up in a joint. So I think that's a big deal. That's a huge quality issue is the moisture. And the THC levels. I think for a while they were really low, and now we're starting to see them climb up a little bit. That's a little bit better for a lot of people, especially the consumer, because a lot of consumers go by that number alone a lot of times when they're buying. So those are a couple thoughts anyway.
I've always thought that caregiver sourced cannabis was probably the best thing you could get from a Michigan provisioning center. When the adult use program came in, I was even more convinced of that. However, I've had some very good Kalkushka is a good example, some very good cannabis producing commercial facilities. But Jim's point is, in my opinion, very well taken. Oftentimes, the amount of days between harvest and consumption have a lot to do with the quality of the cannabis that you get. The variety of strains, the individual attention, the packaging, the personal handling of your cannabis when it's trimmed and when it's handled. Those are things pretty much absent in the commercial market. And I think those things all contribute to the experience of having good quality cannabis. Colin, you've been in the industry for a bit on the activist side as well as on the distribution provisioning center side. Your answer to that question, are we getting world caliber with our cannabis right now, or are we still a little struggly?
Well, we are and we aren't, I think is the best answer. I think that, the growers that have been doing it for a long time really have mastered their craft and have, like Jim said, made it so sticky, and that's what I look for when you roll it up, and just so that it burns slower too. I think if it's too dry, it just goes a lot quicker. I think that what I haven't been working in a provisioning center for a couple months now, and so I haven't seen all the newer grows and how they've come online. Some I've heard are pretty good, but for the first year or so, especially when the licensing in medical marijuana came out before recreational marijuana. There was a whole year before that. It was High Life Farms and what was the other place? Green Peak, Red Bud Roots. These ones, I'd say the quality sometimes would be just you get a good strain in, and maybe half of that bag was really good, and then the second half was a lot shakier and drier or something like that. I'd say some of them kind of had gotten better in the quality, but in the last year for sure. Definitely I could tell with some Redwood Roots, I feel is out of the three were probably that I mentioned was probably the best in the quality. And then I think I've tried different cannabis from different places. We tried the Illinois cannabis that one time in studio, and it was pretty good. I'd say it was still a little drier than what I'm used to, and it was a little bit difficult to open that container. And I know sometimes I feel bad, or I would feel bad I would convince someone in the store to buy a certain product, and then I didn't try it, but I told them I did, and then I'd go home and then I'd try it, and I'd have a hard time opening that product myself. And so there's a couple things I guess we could really work on in the state. I think that what I've seen New York and Ohio products are just a lot worse than ours, and I couldn't even they were worse than ours in 2011, 2010. When we were first that's what it reminded me of, most of the weed that I would get when I was 18, 19. before like dispensaries started opening and everybody started growing.
It is true here in Michigan, we've had such a rich history of quality cannabis that current retailers are finding it hard to compete with the legacy market because the quality of cannabis on the legacy market is just so outstanding. We're not seeing shoebox brown anymore. We're not seeing, grasshopper parts in your cannabis any longer. Those are things of yesteryear. Nowadays, what's on the market? Sticky, dank. It's got some smell. It's loud. It's really tough for a commercial competitor to compete with that, especially if the pricing is not in alignment with what we're having in the off market. Mike, thank you for joining us today. I know Jamie hasn't formally introduced you yet, but let's get your feedback on this too. You're in the cannabis industry. You've been observing for a while. What do you think the status is? We're clearly getting better, but are we competitive nationwide?
As far as Michigan goes, yeah, by and large, I think it's definitely some of the best cannabis in the world. Like, absolutely. Any place you go, you're going to find your pockets, your home growers that are doing a great job, but just across the board, people that actually recognize, appreciate, care about quality, a lot of natural farmers, people who care if it's organic, making their own inputs. There's a lot of good stuff here in Michigan, and I miss it when I go other places. Just a little background, I've done a lot of design builds and helped some facilities get up and running in different places and done troubleshooting. So I've been in a few countries in like 6 states over the last couple of years. So I've got a pretty good sample size under my belt of what's out there. And I'm just so proud of what Michigan is putting out. And to speak to like maintaining that, I would say I'm really worried because, reasonably worried because right now is the turning point that in other states, the average quality kind of takes a downturn because commercialization, which I'm a part of that, and there's a responsible, great way to do it. But with commercialization, sometimes part of that is a race to the bottom. How cheap can we make it? How cheap inputs can we buy? Do people really care about quality? Can we just run stuff through? And so it's a really crucial right now, I think, to really educate and expose consumers to quality, make them ask how their weed is grown, where does it come from, stuff like that.
Right. I want to say, Rick brought up the how he's had some commercial cannabis that's really good. I agree, and the connection that I've noticed there is those people who have put out excellent cannabis in the commercial industry have a decent background in history, oftentimes coming up through being caregiver for many years. And the places that we deal with at Botanical Company, the Real Leaf Solutions and Driven Grow and True Cannabis, that's Tom Beller, Drew Driver, and Kevin Priebus, all longtime great caregivers. So there's a connection there, I think.
I think when we talk about Michigan and what makes it unique, our history with our medical marijuana program eclipses what other people had, because not only did we have the ability for people to cultivate 72 plants legally in their home on behalf of patients, they could tinker with it and no one messed with them. They could hybridize and it was okay. They really learned the genetics, they learned the proper conditions and everything else too. So when a commercial opportunity comes around and you're taking someone who's already gained all that knowledge and experience, it translates less rockily than someone coming in from California or Colorado or the East Coast who's not familiar with Michigan plants, Michigan problems, Michigan humidity, the potential for incredible cold snaps and what that could possibly do to your plants, and how to mitigate some of the mold issues that we have in our state. I've had growers from other states tell me they hate growing in Michigan because we have mold everywhere. So it's just one of those things. You have to have that experience. And if you do, kudos and bonus. Those are the people that we really thought were going to be successful in the new market, were the folks who had a lot of experience already in the state before legal and before medical came around. In some cases, it's turned out to be true, but in others, it's horribly not. And we still have a lot of work to do to make sure social equity is realized in the way that we had envisioned.
It's great that we have social equity rules. Michigan has done such a better job than anywhere else. And if I could, I think currently the most important thing and the greatest value that social equity brought was the concept, kind of normalizing it, that hopefully it's expanded and brought to other areas of our society.
I've had conversations with folks from Illinois who talk about their social equity program, and once a couple of hiccups are worked out and they actually get it rolling, it seems like that might be the new national standard. I've also said that Detroit is one of the biggest disappointments in the nation because they have the opportunity to do a municipal social equity program that sets the standard all across the world, essentially, and they've missed the opportunity. They have all the tools in place to do it right, to do it better than anyone before them, and they just have decided to sit on the sidelines and let the bulls run free. I don't understand.
So the guests that were on Medical Mondays a couple weeks ago, the name escapes me, but they were working with Councilman Tate, and thought that they're. Who are they?
She was wonderful.
Yeah.
The two women that had that new young business, they're just
getting
great.
Yeah, and anyway, the we should figure out who they are and have them on here too soon enough. But it sounded promising. They were doing great work. They were at the table, part of some of these discussions, and getting the right information to those who need to have it. So it doesn't always equal the right thing happening, but that conversation sounded reasonable anyway. So.
And of course, Councilman Tate's been in charge of Detroit's failed effort to get involved in adult use cannabis for several years now. And I say failed because really there's been no realization of it. They don't even have an actual proposal to put before council for a vote at this point. And they've been claiming they've been working on it. Jamie and I have been testifying before city council in Detroit. The last time I did was, I think, 2019. In 2016, at least, this particular effort was started when they talked about the MMFLA program coming in, and they didn't want that, and then that kind of got forced down their throat, and so now they really don't want the adult use program.
Yeah.
What do you think the main barrier is?
Their brand.
I'm sorry, Mike. Say that again.
I'm sorry. What's the main barrier? What do you see as the main stopping point to getting things moving forward? It seems like so many people could benefit.
The city of Detroit's traditionally been in an anti-cannabis mindset because of their the religious minority that's there. They're very powerful. They influence elections. They have a lot of influence on council. And when the religious leaders in Detroit decide to get together and band together, they are a big force to be reckoned with. And they have set their sights on this particular issue as the one thing that they are just going to say no to. And Councilman Tate still has to face elections just like every other council person. And if you fear that ziggurat coming down on your butt, you don't do anything that's going to make them angry.
There's also some people who suspect corruption. There's also a tradition of that in Detroit, and that there might be a scenario where people are trying to line up the rollout of this program to be beneficial to certain people over others. And that's been some of the holdup too. And that's not uncommon. Unfortunately, there's some big money speaking in this whole discussion.
The claims that Councilman Tate's office has made to explain why they haven't realized an adult use program yet is because they're trying to capture the social equity at its best to make sure that Detroit people and Detroit ownership takes place of Detroit facilities and all of that stuff, which sounds really good in concept. But if they haven't actually realized a plan, if they haven't actualized any of the incentive that they've been given, then that's just stuff and nonsense.
Well,
so,
sorry, you're right. In addition, there was policy passed by the people a few years ago, and that was blocked also. So
that means there were two proposals put out that were passed by the vote of the citizens of Detroit to create pro-cannabis. One was a zoning ordinance, Jamie, and one was an approval ordinance. Is that correct? Authorizing ordinance?
Yeah, and it was the issue came with the zoning ordinance. The legal question was, can you change zoning via a local initiative? And the circuit judge said no. That hasn't been challenged yet, but the circuit judge said no, so that's where it stands right now.
Probably won't be challenged. It's been, 2 years now? I think that vote was...
They started the challenge and then withdrew. I think the idea of continuing on with spending the resources over it became less appealing.
I feel like that petition drive, it was during the 2016 ballot initiative, maybe.
You might be right,
I remember collecting signatures for both.
Yeah. Well, all I know is that the citizens of Detroit, every time a ballot proposal has been placed before them authorizing relaxed cannabis laws in the city of Detroit, their citizenry have said yes. They've not rejected a single one. The statewide ballot initiative for medical, they approved overwhelmingly. The statewide ballot initiative for adult use, they approved overwhelmingly. Every piece of evidence suggests the citizens of the city of Detroit are ready for this. It's just the upper echelons that are reluctant and refusing. And that's really sad.
I think it has a lot. It might have something to do too with just all the investors and the buildings that are going in, and you look at Dan Gilbert and his company, companies like that probably want to do more developing before they give it up to cannabis.
Well, Detroit's got a crazy rule too, Jim. They don't allow any medical cannabis distribution centers along any of these historical hubs. If you know much about Detroit, Detroit's a circle at downtown with 5 rotating spokes, Mack Avenue, Michigan Avenue, Woodward, and they don't want cannabis distribution centers along any of those historical spokes. Those are the most well-traveled streets in the entire city, and it seems contradictory to say we want to embrace an industry, but only in the shadows and in the back streets and on the off roads. Detroit's
got a shut up. Detroit's got a much more strict definition of drug-free school zone than the federal government has, and that's caused some issues too. Daycares, which are oftentimes licensed in homes, so now you're battling against a distance of something that normally isn't an issue. Parks, just a regular park. These churches, and sometimes they're a church that's not even functioning, but it's there and it's recognized as such, and it still stops the zoning issue. And some people have like bought those daycares and stuff, and then not had the license there anymore in order to accommodate the zoning. It's been really weird. In order to fit your proposed cannabis business into that particular spot on the block, sometimes you do buy that one thing that would be the barrier to your being able to realize that business plan. And as Jamie mentioned, sometimes you have a church, and I'm just creating an example here. I'm not citing anything specifically, but you could have a church that hasn't operated for 3 or 4 years as a church. Could just be a shell of a building, may have even actually burned. And because it's still registered as a church on some arcane city document listing, that would be a barrier for cannabis industry businesses to be able to put around there. Same thing with liquor licenses too. You could have a liquor license that was assigned to an address, even though that place no longer serves liquor or it's changed use. And that would still prevent, because it's a controlled use, it would still prevent some cannabis businesses from opening within a certain radius. So these are the type of things that if a wise city wanted to impede the implementation of an industry, these are the things they do. Colin, you were going to tell me how wrong I am, though, weren't you?
I was just saying there are so many churches and like bars and shells of them like located throughout the city of Detroit. Yeah. I was going to say, like, I think Detroit was once known as the city of churches because of how many churches it was built. And all like I know that like there was like a lot of, back in the 1920s, they built like a house with like a bar that's like an extension of the family, like can run it on the corner or whatever, or a little corner store that's a liquor store. And they just line like Michigan, Gratiot, Grand River Avenue, and as closer you get to like, there's like almost like a zone that like you get into in the city where like it just like kind of cuts off into like nowhere land until you get into this downtown area or close to midtown. And I just think that there's so many places throughout in neighborhoods and little corridors that could use these businesses, and but it's just not there.
Well, let's remind our viewers exactly what a cannabis business looks like. It looks gorgeous. Cannabis businesses maintain their lots. They usually have fence lots. They have cameras that face outward. We've seen lots of instances where police officers have actually used surveillance systems from cannabis industry businesses in order to help solve crimes that had nothing to do with the cannabis industry business that just took place close to one of those locations, and the cameras were able to catch that. They're a real help to the community. Not only that, most of the cannabis businesses I know are looking to help the local neighborhood with community gardens, with little league teams, with any of the projects that the local community is doing. our industry is so interested in positivity with our community members. We're willing to bend over backwards and spend money in order to achieve that. A lot of other industries try and force themselves into a community without really caring what the people around think. The cannabis industry, it's almost exactly the opposite. We really do want to work with people in order to fit in nicely. And I think folks expect something different from us. And then when they find out that's what we're really about, they're always pleasantly surprised.
I think you're right. And I actually had that happen at a facility that I was working at, where there's a tow truck company next door to us that had been broken into, and the police contacted us, and we went through the video footage and were able to at least get the vehicle that pulled up and broke into the place. And a lot of the places, a lot of clients that I work with are doing different things for their community. And I think there's actually opportunity for, there are a lot of people that want to want to give back, I think more than they have time to even. Like if there's some sort of organization to pull all these licensees together and, put the flames together instead of having them be all separate, I think can be even greater good than is already happening. But I've seen such a wide variety of charitable contributions that it's beautiful. People even talking about getting licenses for the purpose of getting profit for charity, almost as a nonprofit, give back to these schools or.
Ryan Basor.
Yeah. And Steve and Bobby from Helping Hands and Ohm of Medicine and the things we did with Big Daddies, I can cite 1,000 examples of people before they were required to, before there was any regulation, our legacy market, our illegal market, doing wonderful things for people, just going out of pocket in order to help things or arranging and organizing folks to be able to do things like highway cleanups or to work on a particular city park project. Our industry, even without a mandate from the government, was already doing this stuff. So when the regulated industry came in, it was just kind of commonplace that this was going to happen, and it wasn't unusual. And people have really picked up the ball and run with it. I love to see this. And you mentioned Ryan Basor's redemption, Jamie. Why don't you explain to our viewers what Ryan's doing that makes it so special?
Ryan is giving back proceeds to people who have been adversely affected by the war on drugs, specifically cannabis related issues, whether it's getting some help for somebody who's recently been released and they're trying to get back on their feet, maybe getting resources into people who are incarcerated at the moment, maybe some legal help, but whatever he feels is going to be, positive to help somebody who's been adversely affected. So it's a very cool program.
As a former incarcerated person himself, Ryan knows exactly how important it is to have a commissary account that's full so that you can get the things you need in order to have any hope of a safe or sensible life behind bars. And one of the things he's mentioned several times is to make sure that prisoners for cannabis crimes have their comm accounts filled up. There are other ways you can help incarcerated persons. It's not just about making sure they have bubble gum and lawyers. There's a lot of ways you can assist them too.
I wanted to add for record, the way we're talking about it, just a couple blocks away from me, there was a dispensary that was in operation for a long time. And there was a murder that took place nearby with the murderer driving off in a car. And that was able to be, not the murder, but the license plate and description of the car and all that kind of stuff was able to be captured by the security cameras of the dispensary, and the police were able to use that to track him down. And just a few weeks ago at our place, the Botanical Company in East Tawas, there was someone who entered through our property to cause damage to the car dealership that is right next to us. And the police used some of our video footage to try to determine what was going on with that as well.
That's excellent. And oftentimes commercial facilities are interested in watching things like, are people shoplifting? Are my employees stealing from the till? Is someone breaking windows in my parking lot? And they're really only concerned with their own property and their own persons. And I can understand why, maybe that they would take that attitude. But with the Marijuana Regulatory Agency and with the requirements of the MMFLA and the MRTMA, we have very robust security systems. So when a city like Detroit worries that a cannabis operation is going to bring detriment to the neighborhood, it's baseless. It's boundless. We haven't seen that. And that's true, by the way, the whole camera thing, whether you're talking about a processor, whether you're talking about a distributor, a transporter, testing facility, cultivation facility, every one of the regulated facility license types requires external security of this nature. And a lot of them just fence in their lots, just go right for it and make sure that everything's taken care of. So there's really less chance of crime if you have a cannabis building in your neighborhood than if you have an empty building in your neighborhood.
That's been demonstrated before, and you remember one of the first studies that demonstrated that was a few years ago now in California, and it was so it shook people so much that the company, which is very reputable, actually like withdrew its findings, not the data at all, but withdrew the findings due to a lot of pressure from the federal government.
Yeah. The conclusions that they included along with the scientific numbers that they published, the conclusions were that these places don't cause problems, and that was very contradictory to the message.
Crime goes back up when they're closed down. I think it's specifically what it concluded.
Yeah.
And that didn't look good for, a contra effort that had more momentum and more power behind it a few years ago.
Oftentimes, the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking region, which is the essentially a publicity wing of the Colorado police and federal government agencies, they're notorious for taking information and twisting it around to represent something it doesn't necessarily do. But in California, they did the same thing too. And that study that Jamie was talking about was clear as day as far as what the conclusions were. But they really tried to dismiss it. They tried to attack the science. They tried to attack the persons that had done the study. They tried to attack conclusions. They tried to bring in contradictory data. They really were not willing to accept. And now that there's money behind the industry, boy, they're really starting to line up there. And in Michigan, we have certain communities that are setting the example too. Tawas in that area up there, Bay City, Eau Gray, some of the other zones, Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, really talking about setting a good example of how cannabis commerce can be seamlessly integrated into a city function without really any detriment. And good luck, by the way, to Annie Somerville today, Ypsilanti City Council. I know she's got a primary election, and I hope that she's successful with it too.
And she's the best. So
Denise Kirchhoff, also Washtenaw County prosecutor candidate, also looking for a thing today. Jim, you've got a couple candidates you wish well to also, don't you?
I do, Eli, and
Ann Bannister.
Forgetting?
Ann Bannister.
Yusuf Rabi, of course, probably not challenged in his primary, but yes, Yusuf Rabi's got one today.
Yeah, they're not on my ballot, but I'm hoping those guys win it.
No, but
sure.
Ann Ann Arbor City Council took over for. Help me out for a second. I'm drawing a blank. Sabra took over for Sabra Briere, and came in and has done her own job or whatever, but has maintained that level of support for our issue, and it's very important. And she is looking favorable to help out with the decriminalized nature effort as well. So it's important that she maintain her position.
We've interviewed on this particular program multiple candidates for office at a House rep level, or at a county level, or at a city level. And we've seen just the quality of people stepping up to embrace cannabis as part of their plank and their platform. Really just amazing. We have... go ahead, Jamie.
I'll say Mike mentioned a group that would try to get everybody together and to help and that type of thing. And I think as far as the business world goes, one of the closest things is an industry association called the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association. And they recently put out a surveys to a bunch of candidates to I'm not sure exactly what the grading was, but to try to determine, where people generally were, and that can be found. It's online. It can be reviewed. And there were, and it was brought up, I think, in an article or a discussion anyway online. A lot more Republicans involved on this list, just demonstrating how cannabis kind of crosses the political spectrum. We've seen it for a long time, but it's becoming a lot more clear.
Well, I'm just going to criticize a little bit. The people that carried the water to get us here, mostly Democrats. So we see a lot of people that recognize commerce is available now, and that maybe some of the stigmas disappeared, and they're willing to come out of the woods. I'm more impressed by the people that have always been in our corner. My feeling is oftentimes political candidates will adopt a favorable position for something just to get elected, and then poof, it's no longer important to them. And I've seen that from one particular party often.
Well, I think that was the process, but the fact that we can look at it now and see that it's gaining in support makes our position better moving forward, hopefully.
I agree too. We are also warned by Robin Snyder via an email, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks ago now, to watch out for efforts to alter the marijuana regulatory agency programs like the MMFLA and the MRTMA, which is the medical cannabis business program, and the adult use cannabis business programs. After the election, there's a period of time called lame duck between the end of the election and the end of the time. And in that instance, we oftentimes see a lot of really heinous legislation getting passed by people who know that their time is short in the legislature and this is their last chance to get something done. And we've been warned that might be a very busy cannabis adjustment time. And oftentimes, people try to cloak the changes that they make in the garb of greatness. They would like everybody to believe in the benefits that they're touting. But there's usually a consequence and a cost. And typically, the people that are consumer advocates, the ones watching out for patients and consumer users of cannabis, we're always really skeptical when someone says, no, this is good for business and it's good for patients, because usually it's one or the other.
Yep. We still give a lot of examples of why it takes a lot longer for government to catch up to the people.
Yep.
Some of these issues. This transition is in part made difficult by that.
City of Detroit, as we talked about before. Go ahead, Jim.
There's the bill, Senate Bill 660, that was passed in a lame duck session, that should cannabis get descheduled or rescheduled, it would allow Canadian firms to come down and start pharmaceutical businesses to dispense cannabis.
It would have, yeah.
It would really throw a loop in everything.
Yeah.
660 established something called the Pharmaceutical Grade Marijuana Act, which is still a program on the books in Michigan that nobody knows about except for us.
Yeah. But I'm personally no longer concerned about it, but it was a very weird thing in its time.
And it would have authorized the ability to sell cannabis through Walgreens, Walmart's, Rite Aid, all the CVS, licensed pharmacists. Now, whether or not they would, because of federal issues, is a different story.
No,
but it would license them to distribute this special pharmaceutical grade cannabis only.
You know, it made its own pharmacy. It didn't work with existing pharmacies. It created its own independent retail pharmacy type outlet for it. Its original version of it was that everybody would get it sent to them by mail. And then,
which is the Canadian model, right?
Yeah, and then subsequent version had these distribution locations.
Is that a lot of Randy Richardville's doing, I believe?
He's probably involved in a lot of stuff that we don't know about. I just want to say that, based on some things that I've heard. But
I'm not sure which legislators want. Prairie Plant Systems, which is an Ontario-based company, flew a bunch of legislators and principals from Michigan up to their facility in Ontario to view what they did. Yeah. And I'm not sure whether Richardville was part of that or not. I think Jones was, though.
I think Senate Bill, I think it was Rick Jones. Senate Bill.
But Richardville and Jones oftentimes sparred. Even though they were both Republicans, they were both not very happy with each other at times. Jones being a former sheriff and Richardville just being a permanent dick. So between the two of them.
Two giant egos.
Yeah. Well, I had a very famous sparring session with both Jones, and then a separate very famous sparring session with Richardville.
So, on this bill, in Senate Bill 660, while it was being voted on in the House, while it was hitting the floor, the governor interceded and said, I'm not signing that ultimately unless there's a provision that says it's only valid if federal government reschedules. So it was Governor Schneider's input as far as that part of it goes. And that's the thing that stopped it from moving forward.
Right. So the program would have created a whole parallel program. We had the medical system. This is before adult use would have been the medical system. And then it would have been this pharmaceutical grade cannabis. and it would have controlled all aspects of distribution of cannabis on a commercial level in Michigan, and would, as Jim mentioned, give huge advantage to that one Prairie Plant Systems company.
And you had to choose. You had to quit
You had
being
to
a
choose which
patient
one.
and start getting in that program, or one or the other.
It's crazy.
When we see that program was specifically set in order to create not only business advantage for a couple of individuals, but also to undermine the medical marijuana program that we've already been enjoying for years at that point, that was really proof positive that the legislature really, really hates our cannabis proposal that we passed by the vote of the people. And they really want to switch it from what it is into something more advantageous in their minds. And we can never let that happen. We have to always watch out for it. We have to continue to allow people to enjoy things like home cultivation, transfer of cannabis amongst consenting adults, consumption without penalty. There are certain rights that we've got now that we can never recede. We can never rescind.
Okay, so let's take this opportunity maybe to introduce Mike a little bit more and focus on some cultivation type stuff. Mike, I know I can't remember exactly when, but in the last couple of years, I crossed paths with you at one of the cannabis networking events that Jamie Cooper puts on. And I remember thinking it was very interesting, your background and how you came into the cannabis world, and then things that have gone on since then. And I know you've been a lot of places, as you've mentioned earlier, but you've been here for quite a bit, and you're consulting and with Overgrown Consultants, if that's still valid. And you've helped out many people, just independent small-time growers, as well as some of the larger industrial type thing. So whatever else you'd like to add, and then let's start talking a little bit about cultivation and some of the stuff that you've been doing.
Yeah, I guess I'll go way back to the beginning. I started growing when I was 15 years old, and it's my 25th season growing this year, actually. And along the way, I've had a lot of different experiences doing that and helping people on different levels. About 7 years ago or so, I quit everything. Just wanted to. There are a lot of reasons. Just wanted to kind of take less risks and whatnot at the time. So I went back to school for chemical processing and environmental technology. Did water quality research for the National Science Foundation and some other work and product development work. And then somebody that I was working with doing product development stuff, some car waxes of all things, bought into a cannabis facility out in Oregon. And he knew nothing about the industry and was completely under his skis. And they asked me if I had any ethical dilemmas with the industry. And at the time I was, technical services, Mike. And so I just said, nope, I have no problem with it, but I didn't tell them my background. So I went in and I got the place dialed in, and I wrote all the SOP and trained the staff a little bit in some techniques and got the environment really well controlled, and it went really well. And that led to another thing, which led to another thing, to another thing. And it's just, it feels very meant to be. It's been such a huge part of my life since I was 15, since I was a kid. And then I left it because I was afraid of being persecuted, essentially. And then it just found its way back into my life perfectly. And so now, I work on anything. I work in people's basements. If they want to get their caregiver grow, their personal medical grow, we'll help out with that. But also, my design build group has had their hands on over 2 million square feet of commercial cannabis facilities. And I've been with them for the last 2 years or so. They've been around for like 9 years. So I wasn't around for all of that or anything, but definitely have no problem working on the largest of projects. But I was just in somebody's basement yesterday, and that I'm as passionate, if not more passionate, about helping people on that level, honestly.
Are you hopeful that the big commercial gardens, ones that do things correctly, will be producing some quality cannabis? They get knocked a lot now, obviously, for.
Sure. And it's everyone's going to get better, hopefully, and there are, and it's just like something homemade from your grandma's kitchen. It's not going to be the same as something that comes out of a restaurant or a factory. But that doesn't mean you can't get great product out of those places. So some things that, like Jim had mentioned, what happens after harvest. I think that's one of the weakest links out there. The moisture level is a big problem, but also drying too hot. So these terpenes, they're like solvents, and they give moisture too. It's like a solvent that makes it more greasy and sticky versus just like, dried up, those start vaporizing at 70 degrees. And a lot of people are drying these at like 80 degrees just to get it done and crank it out. And, there's some practices that can be improved, but like you said, Jamie, caregivers come in and people have long-term experience. They know the little tricks, they know the details, they know what numbers you want to hit, and that's important. In other states, there are kids that come on and they only have commercial experience. And in some cases, that might be living soil, no-till bids, super dank, awesome stuff. In other cases, it's a 1 part nutrient, weigh it, dump it in, and hit the auto feeder or whatever it might be. And so there's both sides of the spectrum. And when I first started working in other places, I expected it all to be like Amsterdam was back in the day. Families from Europe, I was lucky enough to take quite a few trips over to Amsterdam as I was going through to see my grandparents. And it was just amazing, such a wide variety, like a candy store, one thing to another, different growers. And the first time I went out to that grow in Oregon, I went to 6 different dispensaries and walked out of each one. And then the last one, I just said, is this what happens? Now they had been put down the ringer. They sold way too many licenses. When I was at that time, there's 1 million pounds of overgrow when the state only needed 250,000 pounds a year in the license system. And so they were under this pressure, like just grow as much as you can. People want the $7 eighths, just crank it out, grow a ton of outdoor, leave the leaves on it, just grind it up and put it in pre-rolls. 1 part nutrient, fine. It's good in flower, it's good in veg. I mean, it looks like it's growing. So, it's people purposely not flushing their flour to leave salts in it so it weighs more. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff that I've seen out there, but I don't mean to sound so pessimistic. I'm just right now is the time in Michigan when it really matters, when all that changes, when in other states people looked around and said, like, where did all the good weed go? Like, just as soon as caregivers start to get kind of phased out, unfortunately, and people forget what good is pretty quickly, I think. I don't know if you guys remember Beasters, like Beasters being around like 90s, early 2000s by any chance. Maybe it was just slang term in these particular circles that I personally was in or whatever, but it was really low quality, but seedless weed generally from Canada. And very chemi, very loaded with salts. I remember water curing some of it once and it lost like 30% of its weight because all these salts accumulate, many of us know, like accumulate in the plant. So when you're growing that way with synthetics, it's important to flush them out. If you don't flush them out, they all remain in there and they're hygroscopic. So they want to pull water in. They have their own weight on their own. So they can purposely load up, force feed their plants and get 50% more weight. And then they're feeding you, this mineral garbage. But I don't want to beat them up.
Do you do something with the flour to get that, to take that weight down and get it out of there? What do you do?
Well, if you're doing that, it's important for the last few weeks to basically just be giving water and flush all the salts that have accumulated into the growth medium, get that out of that substrate, and then also let it use up all that's in its own in the body of the plant, inside its own plant matter. And a good way to go also is growing using other methods. It's not even an issue, I guess you could say, but there are a lot of good ways to do it.
Did you kind of refer to that you had some of that bud that was obviously not flushed properly, and then you did something with it to help flush that stuff out? I think that's what you're referring to, isn't it, Jim?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, there's something called okay, thanks, I didn't understand your question. Yeah, it's called water curing, and to me it's only really, there might be other purposes, but it's only good for like corrective measures. Like, so I haven't done it since, it's probably been at least 15 years since I did that. But you basically take your flour and I weighed it out. Okay, so let's say I have 10 grams here. And I put it in a quart jar with nice clean water, put it in there, leave it in the fridge so it doesn't spoil. And then I'd strain it and change the water every day. And it would go kind of green, little oil slick on top. And at the very end of it, I took it out and I dried it. And I weighed it again, and it gone from, let's say, 10 grams to like 7 grams or so, or 6.5 grams or so. And it's all junk that gets flushed out of it that should have been not in there from responsible growing practices.
Is a lot of that stuff would not the heavy metals, I guess, would the salts though, excessive salts and stuff pass standard testing to get onto the commercial market?
Yep.
Well, salts, of course, can be water soluble. So your methodology sounds like the only solution to get them out is hydrophilic.
Yeah, I think
Hey,
after.
are you familiar with? I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Are you familiar with the ozone machines? And are people using those right now in some of these grows to clean up the flower?
Yeah, ozone I've seen more used for edibles and things like that because those there's these like oxidative chemicals in it. There's ozone and another technology called PVOC, which it's photovoltaic oxidative catalyst. So it's really cool technology actually. It's a like special wavelength of UV light goes through these slats that are coated in titanium crystals, and it makes the water that's passing through them in the air break up into like peroxides and a little bit of ozone and some other stuff that like it oxidizes, that kills those microbes and things that are going through the air. Now, if you dial that up too much, ozone, there are OSHA concerns, so a lot of people want to stay away from that. But also like it'll oxidize the good stuff on the plant too. So I've seen it in one grow in particular out in Colorado that we helped with. They got one of these machines, cranked it up, and it killed the odor and the potency on the plant, but no microbes.
Exactly.
Well, and the goal is, of course, these places are chasing saleable cannabis. You're not going to treat it with ozone or with an ionizer if it passes testing, if it's good to go the first time round. The only time you're trying to do that is as a last-ditch effort to save a crop from having to be destroyed, so it can be utilized as concentrates or as medibles or some different sourcing.
I think you're right. And there are other things people do too, right? Like, dipping in sanitizer, hitting them with radiation machines, hydrogen peroxide dips. I mean, everyone should know that this is the result of, I believe that it's a little bit too stringent. I believe that in Michigan, it's too stringent on microbials personally. There are a lot of beneficial microbes that'll make us fail testing. There are microbes that are just ubiquitous in the environment that are not harmful that'll make us fail testing. And they were pushing people to buy these like giant radiation machines that we're running our product through. And it doesn't mean that we're getting radiation, but it's not necessary.
As a general rule, we try not to consume things that have been irradiated, whether they're foodstuffs, whether they're inhaled, whether they're medicines. And in fact, that's one of the biggest criticisms of the Canadian system. You talked about that briefly. They used to deliver their cannabis to medical patients by mail from a federal source. And what they would do is homogenize the cannabis. It means they throw it all in a gigantic blender, including stems, including seeds, including leaves, whip it all up, put it in a little vial, and send it to you by the post, right? And that's why the black market was so prevalent in Canada, because it sucks so terribly. But the thing they had to do was to irradiate the cannabis, every single gram that left, because it was stored in these big bags and would get moldy. And the irradiation process was the only way to ensure they were not shipping moldy cannabis to patients. So the methodology there would have been to control production so you don't have to leave it sitting in gigantic bags instead of just zap it with radiation, because that's going to change the nature of the cannabis, and we don't know exactly what ways.
That's horrible.
Absolutely, and in addition to that, anybody who's doing that, I have concerns about all of their other practices. Like you said, if they weren't remediating something, if they weren't trying to correct something, then they wouldn't be doing it. And what else is wrong if that's kind of the case?
I asked Director Brisboe on one of the programs that he has done. I think it was on Jamie Cooper's program, actually. I said, as a consumer, I'd like to know if there's been remediation procedures applied to the cannabis that I'm about to purchase from a regulated source. We need to have a sticker on those cannabis products that says remediated. And he said, well, you're not allowed to ask questions at this point. It's just input, so I'll get with you later. Still waiting on that get with you later. And he knows how to get a hold of me. He's called my cell before. So, Brisboe, talk about you. Hook it up, dude. Come on.
That's what we need, though. We need consumers to know what to look out for. And we need to give them more information about the flower. And there needs to be a grower that leads the way on that, or as far as giving all the
some kind of a
trickings
consumer
out and how
agency.
that was grown. Yeah. So.
If there was one brand that set the bar of excellence, Jim, I think that's what you're talking about, right? If there was one company that was just so transparent and they give you all the data and all the info and still remain competitive in pricing, I think people would select that particular brand because of all the information that's available, and other people would want to achieve that standard too, so they'd elevate their normal practices. That's what you're talking about?
Exactly what I'm talking about. And also educate the consumer on when they're lighting a joint and what it's supposed to burn like. It's not supposed to have blue smoke or yellow or green smoke. It's not supposed to be a joint that you have to relight over and over and over again, and it won't stay lit. It's got to have that cure process. And I think there are a lot of consumers that don't understand a lot of those things, and they just keep on relighting the joint and hitting those chemicals. So
When we talk about some of the challenges of modern commercial cannabis production, a couple of things are very apparent. The amount of time it takes from harvest to distribution creates that dryness issue that we talked about, Mike was mentioning, and you talked about too, Jim. Secondly, no cure on the cannabis means that we're not fully realizing all the terpene potential that we have there. So it's lesser as far as its content goes. And then also some of the really questionable methodology that's utilized in bringing some of this to marketplace. I mean, we do need more of a watchdog agency to be able to keep an eye on the industry, because MRA doesn't have the staff to do it. Jamie, I know you want to jump in here.
Oh yeah, I was just going to, after you complete your thought, I just want to know from Mike, while we're talking about this, what's some good advice? What's some common things that people miss during the cure process on any level?
Well, I see it as a two-part process generally, and there are a few different methods that I use, I guess. But generally speaking, in the first process, you kind of want to ride this edge of, get it dry enough that it's not going to mold, but you need to have water inside the plant matter for certain chemical reactions to happen. So I like to kind of get it out of the danger zone for the first couple of days, so that the sugar leaves are starting to get a little bit crispy, but the bud and the stems are still hydrated. And slow things down a little bit and shoot for 10 to 14 days if I can. Nice slow cure, nice slow dry at that point. And I mean, down 60 degrees or so, 60 Fahrenheit, I think is a good place to be, with a good amount of indirect air movement. And then being able to I'll start the humidity a little bit lower, but then kick that up to 60 degrees humidity or so, more or less. You have to feel out the plant. Different, bushier, denser plants and different ambient environment and stuff like that might make things different. Then at that point, when the moisture has left the plant, the stems are snapping, and you're ready to take it to the next step, then I'll usually put it in a bin or some sort of container that's airtight or close to airtight, to kind of start to burp a little bit, see if there's any moisture that needs to be eked out. But then at that point, we go into what I would kind of consider the second stage, which is anaerobic. And that's where you need to have a lack of oxygen for other chemical reactions to take place. So that's, flavor compounds are developing, potency could be increasing or decreasing over time. And so gently packed into a container, not pressed so hard that you're going to be damaging the flower or anything like that, but just gently packed in with as little airspace as possible, so the oxygen that's in there gets eaten up by reactions that are going on, and you end up with those anaerobic conditions, the low oxygen conditions. And then, ideally about a month or so, I'll start checking after a couple weeks, and then after a month, it's good. Some bud does better, some bud keeps on getting better longer than that. Some of it I like really fresh, like some sharper stuff, OG stuff. Things with like a lot of those like strong volatiles, like burn the back of your nose. I like them earlier. Just like wine, right? There's some that are better young and some that do well.
So obviously you can get into a few weeks depending on the type of cannabis you're talking about. It could be a while before it's like at the point where you're going to consider it optimum or ready to go. And you can see why those corners get cut in the marketplace all the time, because somebody wants to buy it whether or not it went through that whole process. So
in order to have the square footage to be able to do a process that you're talking about with Jamie, a 500 to 1,000 plant grow, I can't even imagine the square footage necessary just to do the curing process that would be possible by you as an individual cultivator.
Yeah, I mean, close to the same amount of space. I mean, if you're really going to leave it hanging for that long and do full plant, I mean, it could be close to the amount of space that you're spending on veg, maybe 2/3 the amount of space that you're going to have on space that you would have on veg, more or less, I'd say.
those who pull it off, though, will you'll see the quality difference. and right, the essence, all that kind of stuff will come through.
When I was at Tom and Krista Beller's cultivation facility up in Kalkaska, wonderful place. They accomplished what you talked about, Mike, being able to do that by going vertical. They had gigantic racks that were literally, at least to my estimation, 20, 25 feet tall, that they were able to put gigantic pieces of cannabis on in order to be able to accomplish that drying. Not just in a regular 4 or 5 foot area, but they use the entire vertical ability of their room in order to accomplish that, because that's the ingenuity you have to come up with as a cannabis retailer, as a cannabis cultivator right now, in order to make product good with the space that you're given.
Hey, speaking of ingenuity, Mike, do you hear of the process of cutting the plant in the dark?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you explain more about that?
Absolutely, yeah. There's I guess there are a couple of main things. There's some just traditional gardening techniques, traditional farming techniques that have always kind of espoused to do that, whether you're collecting to make your compost or harvesting your plant. Just kind of it's a little bit wishy-washy, but there's a long tradition of people, for one reason or another, believing that that is the way to do things. But it kind of relates to the dry cure process that I mentioned. So if we think of this, you think of the plant, it's like a big flame, water's transpiring up through it constantly. And as it's going up, chemical substances are passing through all those trichomes as well. And in the heat of the day, terpenes, other volatiles like esters and alcohols and flavonoids are, evaporating out of there, and they're being replenished from below. And then at night, it gets a break. So it gets cooler, there isn't UV light beating down on it. And so all night, it's kind of getting to build up those terpenes, and it's just going to be a little bit danker in the morning than after it's been getting beat up by the sun or by the light all day. So I'll give like 24 hours of darkness, or even maybe 48 if I can't get to it, 24, 36, 48 hours of darkness before harvest, and top dress with ice. I mean, in my personal medical grow where I'm massaging every stem, I'll drop the temperature big time to try to hold all that in.
It's a very common place within cultivators to try and instigate purple coloring by putting it through a dark period or a cold period. Oftentimes, light deprivation triggers a fight response in the plant, which means it overproduces resin, which is exactly what you want just before you harvest. So oftentimes people will take 2 to 5 days, even 7 days sometimes, and keep the plant in a dark environment, still fed, still watered, but just in a dark environment, so that it will help to produce all of those desirable sticky resins. And the cold, of course, inspires purple. I'm not sure what the actual methodology is that makes that happen, but it's a proven fact.
Yeah, it's actually, I think it's a potassium lockout. It's just like at those temperatures, the plant can't, so it's just, you're intentionally giving it a little nutrient deficiency, but with great effects.
Yeah. When you know how the plant is going to respond, you can give it the right instigation in order to get that correct response. And that's really where you're talking about a cultivator like yourself, Mike. You're talking about massaging the individual stems. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would like that kind of treatment. No one does that for me. But, as a plant.
Nobody's lining up to massage Rick's stem these days.
I know.
Tragedy.
Kind of sad. Call me if you want to do that. Call me. But anyway, we're really talking about that level of attention that you just can't do on a commercial level. If you're talking about 1,500 plants, massaging stems sounds like an impossible task.
It is, and there are compromises that need to be made. You're not gonna be able to duplicate, that level of care on a mass scale. You can, but are people willing to pay for it? Like the cost of goods sold in the end for all those higher quality inputs, or the time it would take to make your own high quality inputs, and doing things like that, it's just not there. But there are two sides of the spectrum, and you don't have to go too far away from what I would call it there's a good sweet spot in the middle. We can do a lot better as a whole, as far as across the nation goes, about as far as what makes it to the store shelves, in my personal opinion. But what you're saying about stressing those plants, that is just huge to me. That's probably my favorite kind of topic as far as growing goes. I call it beneficial stress, or beneficial stressors. And I try to think of every variable that I can, and I sequence them and just try to push every little button I can, whether it's swinging the temperature. I'll drill a hole through the taproot or through the stem, shortly before harvest. Maybe give it a really, really strong feeding, so it's almost going into nutrient toxicity. Starve it for a bit, dry it out. When you pinch those stems, it thinks like bugs are attacking it, or it's having like wind to strengthen itself against. I'll use insect frass, which is like sweepings from mealworm and cricket cages. I believe it has pheromones in it and things like that that make the plant think that there are bugs on it, and it springs back with its natural sticky trap, which we love, the resin.
Frass is poop, by the way. You're not saying it, but frass is poop, bug poop. That's what it is. So you rub poop on your plants. That's kind of an interesting technique, man. Nice.
I use worm poop. I use bug poop. I use microbe poop. I use all kinds of poop.
It's a shitty business. Yeah. Here's the thing again. That's something that if you were to try and talk to a bean counter and say, I want, $25,000 to buy frass, they're not giving it to you, right? I mean, as a cultivator, if you're in charge of this big place and ultimately every wish that you have is controlled by some comptroller somewhere who wears one of those clear visors and has a pocket protector and, has a mustache longer than mine, they're probably not going to say yes to some of the things that you want to do to experiment in order to find the best way to cultivate your garden. And the other thing is when you're dealing with multiple rooms just means multiple problems because one room may not perform exactly the same as the other. And while you're trying to tweak that in order to get maximum performance, you may do some detrimental things. So the staffing level goes up, the requirements for recouping your investment go up, and accordingly, sometimes the attention goes down.
Anybody familiar with the Milorganite fertilizer?
Yeah.
You are?
Of course.
Okay. So I just want to point out that's human poop. We're not left out of the whole.
And Jamie, how do they collect Milorganite? Could you please?
All I know, and maybe Mike knows more than me, that it is from sewage in Wisconsin area.
Specifically, Wisconsin sewage?
That's what I have heard over the years. I have not been in that particular game now for a while, but
certainly cleaner than Vegas poop, I guarantee you. Absolutely cleaner than Vegas, and maybe New York City, not so good either. But Wisconsin, what would
you put a lot of cheese in there?
Salad. That's it. I wondered if there had been a survey comparing North Dakota poop to Wisconsin poop to maybe Alabama poop. Certain amount of crocodile in there that might actually make it, it heats together.
Certain amount of cheese.
It's whether or not you want more corn or peanut or goat skin. So the distinctions that you make.
So terrible. I cannot believe we're having this conversation, but thank you. That's funny as hell.
I had no idea.
Yep. Actually, Jamie and I were on stage at Grow Green doing one of the monthly programs, which we used to be invited to when they were still doing them. And Dairy Do, a company in Michigan who actually helps with cow poop that they provide to people for their cannabis gardens. And they were singing the praises of cow dung,
Fish shit. Seen the vendor and met the guys too. Fish shit.
Yes.
That's pretty popular. Fish emulsion in general was used, right? Yeah,
all of those smell horrible too, by the way.
Of course they do.
The end result in the plant works out, though. That's what you put out there.
That's right. Oh, I used to go to a place we used to film something called Fridays. It was at that gigantic the gigantic grow store in Madison Heights. Lovely people there, fantastic folks. And they used to brew teas. Teas, right? They stink. They're horrible. They work well for your plants, but some of those teas, they're concoctions, they're brown and sometimes a little sludgy and tannic and
also feces based.
Oh, it's really not good. Not good. Yep. And don't let someone sucker you into saying, "Hey, smell that. It smells good." You stick your face down there. That's why I mention it. It's an enduring memory of mine.
So, Mike, are you a fan, a proponent of the no-till live soil approach?
Yeah, I am very much so. That's how I do my own personal growing. That's the happiest I've seen plants ever. you know, I've always done, for my personal goal, it's always been organic. And about, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago, I started getting into this methodology called Korean natural farming. And now we just kind of call it modern natural farming, so we can mix in our own stuff. And there's kind of like a grab over like who owns that name and whatnot a couple years ago. But it's essentially creating your own inputs. I collect beneficial microbes from out in the forest from different places. I know which plants are bioaccumulators of different nutrients, so I collect those and ferment them and feed my plants with them. Make different tinctures from herbs and roots and things like that that are growth stimulants and insect repellents and all that. And I mean, plants that I've grown for years organically. Now, if you take a plant that's grown with synthetics, they tend to all want to make kind of like tight, I call it kind of like angry nuggets, I guess you could say. I call it like tight paper towel tube kind of plants. You go from that to organic and they'll open up and they'll show their individual structure a little bit more. And then you go from that to living soil organic, and they just, it's like another new plant again. Like I really smell different flavor profiles in it that I haven't seen beforehand, and seen structure actually come out in it that I did not expect. And I've helped farm, you know, it might seem like something that's not feasible to do on a large scale, but I've helped a 9,000 plant canvas outdoor farm, you know, do natural farming. And they're producing most of their, within the next 3 years, they'll be producing most of their inputs and, you know, growing for pennies on the dollar what other people are. Once they get, it's like learning a language. Once you get your systems in line, you know, the reason that they're so happy. So, you know, a lot of people, we understand that we have microbes on our bodies and in our bodies and in our gut and, you know, in our mouth and in our armpits and everywhere. It's like, we aren't just human cells. They help us with our immune system. They help us with our digestion, with all different kinds of things. Now, if we look at a plant, so you have a plant, its roots are in the soil, it has microbes on it. Now, if we're going with salts, that tends to kill microbes that are in the soil. If we're fostering that good soil biology and giving it everything it needs, then that plant has microbes that are growing on its roots, and then there are things growing outside of that, and there's a whole like soil food web that's happening on there, and the plant is directly connected with that. Now, when we see a plant that has a nutrient deficiency, it's already been suffering for a couple of days. Like, oh, its leaves are starting to yellow, let's give it some nitrogen or whatever it might be. It's already been suffering. But when a plant is planted in living soil, and we're really fostering the health of that soil and the whole system, then as soon as it starts to feel a deficiency, it changes what's called, it exudates, which come out of its roots. It's like sugar water. And basically it says, oh man, I'm really hungry for phosphorus. Let's change the sugar water that comes out of our roots to foster the growth of communities of microbes in the soil to break down what we need to give us back phosphorus. And that happens within like 2 minutes, it changes what it puts out. So the plant will actually give like half of the energy it gets from the sun to these microbes out through its roots in the form of sugar water, rather than trying to hold on to it like plants that aren't in a living soil system. And makes for some really happy plants.
And that's what we were on Medical Mondays a couple of weeks ago. There, the Gage Green Group come up with some really good strains over the years. Grape Stomper for one. We're discussing that very thing that you're just talking about, and that's
and
very
they were talking about changing cultivation techniques to eliminate things like tinnitus when you smoke cannabis and some of the other common negative effects that might be involved because of certain ways that things are cultivated. Welcome to the show, Sally Smith and Ray Reyes. Welcome, regular Cabbage Heads.
Hey, you guys.
Hey guys, I just voted.
Awesome, man. Good for you.
I thought that was your nipple for a minute, and I was all thrilled.
You're like, wait a second. You're like, hold on, that doesn't look like.
It looks like your high beams are on, though.
The government pasty. It's a government pasty there. It's not fair.
Well, you know how a bleached anal thing is a thing? Well, so is bleached nipples.
Take your word for it.
First line in. Appreciate that.
Well, I instigated. Yeah. So, Mike, that's typical of what we talk about on Jazz Cabbage here.
Yeah, you're a departure here. So.
Yep. Now that Shelly's here, we have all those topics open for conversation.
And Shelly Smith and Ray Reyes. This is Mike Fisher. He is a cultivation consultant and expert, and we're talking about a lot of.
I know. I hate I missed the beginning of your talk because that's what I was trying to tune in for.
You'll be able to catch the replay on our Facebook page as well as on YouTube on the Jazz Cabbage Cafe channel. What a great opportunity to do that.
And
it's
and now
awesome.
that you're here right now, you could, if you have some specific questions, you could throw them out, and then he could probably answer.
Well, I wonder, I don't know if you've already talked about once powdery mildew gets on a plant and you're trimming it off or you're spraying it or whatever, how much effect, this is very specific, but how much effect does it have for those powdery mildew leaves to be laying on the ground? Is any? None? Do you have any magic formula for that?
Remove them. Like, you know, if you're trying to treat for powdery mildew, the first thing I do is go through and defoliate as best you can. So you're just removing anywhere it can spread, and then put it in a sealed container, put it in a trash bag, and get it out of there. Because that fuzz you see is little hyphae. It's little like mycelial threads or like fungus threads, basically, and they can break off and float, and they spread that way.
Yeah.
So I defoliate first, and then there are different things you can treat with, I'm not sure what we're using right now, if you want advice on that, but then I would go with some sort of spray to kind of like attenuate it. And then,
well, I wonder, like, if you have a preference. Like, do you use neem? Do you use hydrogen peroxide? Do you use milk? Do you use, like, there's so many theories out there.
Yeah, so I will use neem products. I'll cycle these things, though. So I'll cycle neem product. I'll cycle nettle tea mixed with chamomile tea. Chamomile is actually a really good antifungal, as mild as it seems. So I'll cycle that in.
Nettle and chamomile tea, really? Okay,
Yeah,
all
double
right.
strength. Just get good quality stuff and use double strength like you would brew tea. Or, you know, go get it from outside. There's definitely nettles, a lot of nettles out there. I don't use milk, but I use lactic acid bacteria that I make in a different way, and that's what you're getting from milk. It's like the yogurty sourness kind of smell. So I spray that on there as well. You can get store-bought products like you know, EM1 stands for effective microorganism. So those are a few things that I would cycle and have good effects with. Let's see, putting them outside. If you ever really want to save a plant and the timing happens to be right. I did that this year for a friend of mine who wanted, his grow was having problems with powdery mildew, and he didn't want to lose the genetics. And so, you know, he's sanitizing his house like as we speak, actually. And those plants are scrubbed. I put them outside in Mother Nature with good, healthy soil, which, by the way, good nutrition is the best disease prevention by far. But yeah,
well, I'm working outdoors pretty much, mostly.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So, you know, the things that I said, I would try cycling those things out pretty much, and then, you know, make sure you have a good airflow throughout the plant, undercut it. And if you want to, you know, get a hold of me after, I don't know if I'm going too in depth, somebody, you know, let me know. But I would undercut it so you don't have a lot of bushiness down low that's not getting a lot of airflow. You want to see those stems on the bottom third of the plant or so. Hollow it out from inside. Make sure you don't have dead leaves sitting on there too much. Limit the number of cones. Got a bunch of branches, like making a hedge, like good airflow.
Mike, I've heard cultivators say the PM is systemic. Once it gets in the plant, once you're seeing it on the leaves, it's actually inside the cells of the plant itself, and that it can never really be purged completely. All you can ever do is control the outbreak. What's your opinion about that topic?
I haven't seen the research to give me one strong determination either way. I believe that I can grow it out of a plant, and I believe I've seen that happen. But I think the way that has to happen is like I just took the cuttings yesterday actually to do this. Like I put it outside, or you can do it inside in a clean environment, but get that thing to stretch really quickly. I'm undercutting, getting it to stretch, and then take cuttings from the new growth. And I have had success. I've done that to plants that had powdery mildew, and I did not see powdery mildew on them again after that point.
But that's taking a cutting and then discarding the original infected plant, right?
Yep. And some reason that might make people think it's systemic as well is that it appears, you know, by the time it appears on the surface, I mean, you're seeing a lot of it. So you might kind of spray it down and it goes invisible because you're like packing on the fuzz, kind of like, you know, snow is really visible, but ice isn't. And it's just this compression thing kind of thing. So it's a bear. It's a bear. And there seems to be some really virulent form going around Michigan, if not beyond right now. Like I know a lot of people have been growing a very long time. having trouble that they never did before.
Mm-hmm.
On an indoor level, that a PM infection requires, as you mentioned, sanitization. I mean, every single surface, every single crack, every light fixture, every bulb, everything. Because as you mentioned, those hyphae can get on almost any surface, including your clothing, and you can accidentally transfer those type of particles from one environment to another without even knowing that you did.
Absolutely.
So are you saying I shouldn't wear the same thing every single day that I farm all day? That's the problem.
Oh, wow. You do
Clean
that?
yourself up.
Wow.
Yeah.
You gotta rinse
today,
off every once
these
in a while.
clothes are pretty. I do. I rinse off every once in a while.
Yeah,
Whether I
sure,
need it or not.
usually. We went to some acid weeds.
That's true. I've already confessed everything.
So I got
I was like,
Ray, what you said?
I was about to say I got a really stupid question. Is it true that you can use bull semen for the mildew?
Huh. You know, I've never heard that. Never heard that.
Because of the proteins or some shit like that. I don't know.
Seems
You
like
think?
a limited supply.
He just likes to make everybody have to think about that. I think. I'm not sure if there's much more of a basis to.
Yeah, there really wasn't. I was just trying to fucking get y'all to think.
Ray's got a bunch of bullshit trying to offload. He's got way too much. He can't use it all himself.
Made a really weird eBay purchase, didn't you, Ray? That's, you know,
full of bull semen.
It's sitting in a warehouse in
El Toro.
Walla, Washington, just waiting to be sold to the next vendor.
People think this is Coke I'm drinking.
Yeah. Get those young kids to hack Donald Trump's Twitter account and then put that out there. You'll sell it out in a heartbeat.
We'll just say this is this will cure COVID and herpes.
Plus, it gives your face that pleasant glow.
Shut up.
Yes. Just look at Ray. He's got
look
it all
what it did
over
for him.
himself.
Yep. He's full of it.
Wow.
Not because he's greasy.
So, squirming back to the original conversation a little bit.
Okay.
I know.
Can I ask
He got
another
really
question?
quiet
Okay.
there.
That's
That's
all right.
funny.
Mike's been laughing. I've been watching
Yeah.
him. Mike's been laughing.
He's
so-
appreciative, but
That's right.
He's like,
But anyway, you know, one thing I wondered about with the no-till process, particularly if you've got bigger plants, but either way, what's the process for preparing it for the next plant? What happens with the root ball that you know?
For the root ball, you leave it in there. Just chop it off. Cut it close to the soil, hang that plant, and then next year you go in and after some preparation, some bed preparation and all, you want to plant right next to that. I recommend planting right next to it because that root, there's the soil food web, there's all the microbiology that's on that root, and it's dug down deep into the soil already. It's made its pathways, and then those roots start to rot. And I believe, I haven't dug up and watched, but I believe when you plant right next to that stem, those roots kind of follow those same pathways and benefit from those microbes and those microbial communities that have already been established down there. And then
I have another question.
Uh-huh.
So let's say you get you have plants that are now about between 4 and 8 feet tall, right? And then you discover there's a male right in the middle of a row, right? And you discover it, you yank it out of there, you get rid of it.
There's a cock in
But
the hen
how?
house.
it's a tootsie. It's called a tootsie.
Like the plot of the show Bosom Buddies, where there's a guy amongst all these women.
Holy shit! There's a man in here. No.
Yeah.
How
We call him a Tom.
important is it? Do you have to do anything to the plants on either side? Like, when are you worried that you found oh shit, I think we got all the males, but then you find one?
I mean,
when are you really? Yeah.
Yeah, at that point, I would look at that one plant and see if it seemed like any of the pollen sacs opened up or anything like that. if it's possible, I would kind of like bag it up before I cut it and remove it, so just in case anything's open, so you're not shaking pollen out. And then I would recommend hitting those plants with water, because water will deactivate and wash off the pollen. But apart from that, just kind of keep an eye on them, the ones around there.
Is there any truth, Mike, to what you can do during the vegetation state to ensure that you get female or get a better percentage that you're going to get a female by stressing the plants out? And like I've heard, like between the 3rd and 5th week of veg, you just change their lights, and then that just does something later on when they go to flower.
I'm not familiar with that technique. I know there's a way to stress them nutritionally to get them to go hermaphroditic and produce either all female or all males. So like based on what nutrient you're using to stress them, you can make it go that way. But I personally haven't explored that and don't know the best way to go about that, or if there's validity to it personally. Did you say it was maybe the lighting schedule that people were talking about using?
Yeah, within like the 3rd and 5th week, just for like 5 days or so, you just change the lights on them. And
Jim, is that
give them less light?
Is that a plant that's being produced for seed specifically?
No, you want it to be a female. So you want it to be a female, and you stress it during the veg state. And I did an experiment when I've only had one grow, and it worked with all 6 seeds that I threw in kind of haphazardly, not knowing what I was growing. It was, I don't know, but it worked, and all of them were female.
When can you sex those? When can you sex the plants? When can you find out whether they're...
It depends. There are different ways to kind of do it. Some plants will start to show sex before they start flowering. So if you start to see little pistils, the little fuzzy white hairs sticking up, then it's a female. And then you can always take a cutting off of your plants when they're in veg and just leave them in water and stick them in a room on 12-12, and they should start to... You don't necessarily even have to root them to sex them. So that's an easy way to do it as well. But otherwise, after they start to flower, after you flip them into flower, and wait until they show signs.
What was the light period change, Jim? Was it just a couple of hours different, or was it an interrupted cycle where it's 4 on, 10 off, or 1 off and 4 back on?
Well, at that stage, I think I went like, I think it was like 18 and 6, and then I took it to like 16 and 8, or I have my notes, let me go back into my notes and figure that out from way back when. But,
cool.
DJ Short talks about flowering at 13-11 instead of 12-12. I'm sure, Jim, you've heard his discussion many times, and he talks about that quite often. Is there any benefit that you know of to that, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. It's not something I've experimented with a lot, but I've heard him talk about that and other growers. I mean, some plants are flowering naturally out there in nature around the equator, and that's about 12-12 all the time. So they start growing at that and they flower at that. And then there are other plants that evolve to, grow with different light cycles and flower at different light cycles. So if I remember correctly, DJ Short says to start to experiment with your plants, but with 15-minute increments, and see how great of differences you might see when you hit that sweet spot. And something that I haven't been able to explore, but I totally see the logic behind it, and it's always exciting to have more to explore down the line.
Plants originating from Turkey or the northern latitude, something more, more common, like where we're at right here on the globe. We know the cannabis plants developed. The Assyrians were using them in Central Asia, and that's certainly a different light zone than you would find in the tropics or subtropic areas. Yeah.
It grows all over the world. Some regard, right?
What's interesting too is if you check them and you check them and you check them and you, like the one that we found today, we swore was a female, and then suddenly, boom, balls. You can see the little balls. You're like, there they are. Those little balls. This one's got to go. But like we thought we had checked everything. So it's interesting because some of them will, just like a lot of other species in the world, like express one way for a while and then clearly be something else. So it's fascinating. It's like you would think, oh, we've already gone through this room or we've already gone through this field. And checked everything, but you can't stop checking them.
Well, I mean,
You have to keep checking them.
it could have both sexes on it still, so it was very tricky. Like, could have started budding or something, or I'm not sure what stage you're in or whatever, but I mean, it could be hermaphrodite, and then, you know, take even longer to figure it out, possibly.
It sounds like a conversation about an ICP after concert party, actually, Ray. You know about this, right?
Well, let me get.
It is.
You know what? In that
Girls
case, let me
pretend to
get
be boys,
my 2 cents in. You know what I heard that if you have a problem with a plant going male, that if you just play some Liberace,
That'll do
it. Just gotta play some Liberace and take away its balls or anything else that you can find that's demasculine.
Yeah.
Anya. Yeah, I can listen to that.
Demascalania.
See, Mike, you're learning all kinds of stuff from our people here today. Yes, we thought you would be teaching us, but we're teaching you now.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, real scientific question here for you, bro, because I've been asking this for a while, and no one seems to have the smarts to be able to like give me a straight up answer. So maybe you might be the one. Maybe you might be. So
I think.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
All right, so let's just say you walk into your garden and you look at all the plants and you find the one that's the most stimulating for you. Now, when I say stimulating, I'm talking about a boner, okay? Or something close to it, like love.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, but that's the one, okay? So that's the strain that you find yourself attracted to.
Yeah.
So what you do next is, like, you know, you get some, if you can, try to find some seeds of this plant. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take it into a dark room. You're going to put a little, you're going to take that seed, you're going to put a little tiny like incision in it, just enough to like open it up a tiny bit, and then drop them seeds into a pile of, get this, semen. Your own semen, your own blood, your own spit, whatever, your DNA, to try to get this thing to fucking grow into a new strain that is going to incorporate some of your composition.
Body.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah,
is that possible? Is that
I think
possible?
that's how Batman villain Poison Ivy was formed, I think.
Yeah, there's some hybrids of fish and plants out there, aren't there? So something
No. This is something legit, right, Mike? I mean, if you put the seeds in your mouth, you're trying to teach the seed to match your body, right?
You know, I have heard people talk about the possibility that like with epigenetics is the term that they're saying. So like kind of like non-evolutionary adaptation of our own genes based on our surroundings and our environment. And funny enough, somebody was just talking to me about, you know, physical contact or having them in their mouth potentially, you know, the thought of that or the idea of that. I'm not saying I believe or don't believe, but I've heard stranger things, you know.
Oh, really?
So what I'm saying is,
you just reinforced him. You just gave Ray more ammunition. Oh no!
Here's one for stranger. What if you take just a group of them seeds, you put them in a tubular fucking cigar fucking case that is biodegradable, you shove them in your butt for a while, and then you go ahead and plant them afterwards.
I mean,
it might not sound like it, but Ray is really serious about this. So if you could, give him a straight answer.
Just give me a straight up answer. Just a straight up answer.
OG enema. Woo! Smoking that strain.
Ray is looking for a scientific, somebody to give him permission to put things up his butt. He's just wanting you.
We are degrading, and by no shock, it parallels with Ray's presence.
That's why I showed up late. That's really why I showed up late.
Hey, we are kind of getting toward the end here of what we're going to do. And I know, Rick, if you want to address some of the stuff we talked about, some of the activist stuff before we sign off, we could hit that now. We could see if anybody's got stuff coming up. Mike, I'm hoping that you could let us know how people can get in touch with you if they're interested in talking more about any of this stuff or perhaps hiring your company's services.
Yeah, please. Anyone give me a call or text anytime or send an email. So my phone number is 989-859-2078. And my email is Fisher, Fisher, @overgrowconsulting.com.
Okay. And you're on social media and stuff like that too. People can track you down in Overgrown Consulting. Perfect.
Overgrow.
Hey, man,
No,
very.
Overgrow.
Yeah, not grown, overgrow.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Overgrow.
All right.
It's
Sorry.
kind of a tip of the hat. There's an online community a long time ago that got shut down in like 2003, 2004, and it was called overgrow.com. And I learned a lot there. A lot of friends did. DJ Short, actually, I was on there a lot, and I learned a lot from him, whether he knew it or not during that time. So I wanted to kind of give a nod to that. And then also there's a lot of symbolism behind it, clearly, like, overgrow our adversity and overgrow the persecution that we've been through in this industry, and hopefully overgrow and get some good yields and make some honest money doing this as well.
When we launched Big Daddies in 2009, some of the cannabis cultivators we were using, caregivers at that time, had learned a lot of their stuff from that overgrow. Had never been on it myself, but the people whose work I respected cited that as a source also.
Right.
That's great to hear.
Hey, man, it's the information has been great. I mean, really appreciate it. We kind of had to return to more of a pure cannabis discussion here and got into some really interesting stuff. And really
we had a long talk about poop before Ray came on. Let's give credit where credit's due. We certainly did.
It was kind of in tribute to Ray. I thought it was not said directly, but I think everybody kind of knew it.
It was like 10 minutes on poop, Ray. You got to listen to the video. I swear to God.
You missed
It's
it.
not too out of line when you talked about the semen, so I mean, we just got over the poop.
We're into various bodily fluids around here.
I call this Michigan's most unpredictable cannabis podcast, and this is why.
So, Rick, you want to leave us with anything, or at least headline any of the stuff that's been going on?
Well, just on Friday of last week, we had the Michigan Cannabis Caucus had a small group consisting of Zara Abbas, myself, and Mike McCurdy. Had a Zoom conference with the Attorney General and her staff. She had more people on the phone than we did. It was very productive. It was outstanding. Looks like we've made some requests of the Attorney General's office that she's trying to grant for future appearances, things like that. Looks like there'll be more opportunities for the general public to interact with Dana, as opposed to just a small group of us activists. So look for that coming up. But again, I think oftentimes we get frustrated with government and government's not doing what we want. I think we should ask ourselves first, have you specifically told government what you want? And when you said that, what was the reception? So if we're grousing without actually creating any actions, then it's not very productive. But give those in power an opportunity to meet your needs. And then if they don't, roast them. But, give them that chance first.
She's been a great AG. There's a few things we'd like to see kind of like move forward with from the cannabis perspective. So we're hoping that we can get some movement there. And per this meeting, the report is that she's been receptive. So we'll just take it from there.
Ray, was that a craps table I just saw you had in your hands just a second ago?
Sure is, buddy.
Yeah, that's what I thought. You have a weird house, man. I'm just going to say.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Sounds like it's going to be busier.
We can have cannabis craps.
Casinos are essential, right? So your house then becomes now essential.
Oh, a nice little way to make some side cash. Good.
Cannabis craps, bro.
No, that sounds appetizing.
Again, another poop discussion. I don't know.
Ray will fry us up some dick tacos.
I already made some.
Oh, you brought up an old memory. Here's an old memory.
They're actually in the fridge cooling down.
they're not hot right now. All right. So anybody else have stuff coming up or want to make sure they get some information in, genital or non-genital related?
The psychedelic conference is this weekend.
Psychedelic conference is this weekend coming up.
Yeah.
Where at?
Is there
it's in
live
Detroit, right?
in-person
Yeah.
stuff?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So there is live in-person stuff. Okay.
Do we have to astrally project ourselves to be there so that we don't catch corona? Because I can do that.
Well, you can't.
Oh.
No, I can't. But
They
Mike
say
laughed.
protocol will be followed on all the advertisements and everything, right? So it's
Exactly.
gonna be observing the distance and mask and stuff.
Yeah. But that's the big deal for this weekend.
Shelley, anything else coming up? What about Reeds and Weeds? Any episodes?
Or Weeds and Reeds.
Yeah, there's a couple of episodes coming out. Just did Earth's Life Big Brain Project that will come out tomorrow, and that is wild. Everybody should read that. It's by my friend Josh Valdez. And then we did Packing for Mars, which is by Mary Roach, which is about the science of going into space. And then I'm partnering with Nick Zettel. He called me yesterday with the idea because Nick likes to memorize huge, long poems. And he's been doing Percy Bysshe Shelley. And there's the 200th anniversary of this huge, long poem that he wants to do August 16th from the West Park Band Shell. And so we're going to do a live, like, West Park Band Shell reading of, I think it's called like The Cry of Anarchy or something like that. I'm going to just, I know I'm quoting this wrong, but anyway, it's pretty impressive because he's memorized about 150 lines already. And I think it is going to be really cool. So I'm going to try to put the Facebook invite together, and maybe we'll do more than one poem, but we want to do like a dramatic presentation of this poem on its 200th anniversary because it feels very relevant. And Nick Zettel also is often on this show, so it'll be fun.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
You'd mentioned Gage Green was on the show recently, right?
No, Medical Mondays, but yeah.
Yeah, another one showed it for you.
Yep, but yeah.
But they've got the Organic Cup is coming up in just a few weeks from now or so.
August 23rd, is it that weekend?
I think so. At Gladwin.
Gladwin area, yeah.
Yeah, really close to where I grew up, actually. And I'll be up there with Happy Little Tree Co. Actually, it's a Michigan seed company here.
Nice.
Oh, okay. What is that called? The Organic Cup?
Yep.
And that'll be a live event?
No, that's an in-person event up in Gladwin. They talked about their VIP location and the deals that they had going on there.
Yeah, there's a site. We could probably find that. I don't have it off the top of my brain right now, but we can get that. Maybe Mike knows what it is. You know what the site is for that event, Mike?
It's their property. They have a 40-acre farm up there. We were there for it last year, John and I from Happy Little Tree Co. But we were there last year. It's a nice place. They put up some tents, good community. Last year, there's some really nice speakers and a couple food trucks, and it was great. Good gathering of good people and a lot of good fun.
There's a site where you can get tickets, but
I'm sorry.
No, do you know what it is?
Instagram has the digital flyer.
Instagram. Gage Green Group.
Okay, I'll look it up.
Instagram. Okay, there you go.
Also, I would like to request another looper party.
Oh, that was so much fun.
Yes, please.
Speaking of looper party, I'll be doing something over at Weber's Inn on Saturday for brunch. This Saturday coming up over at
Weber's Inn in Arbor.
Yep, from 11 a.m. till 2 p.m. I'll be doing some, just some laid back instrumental classical rock.
Really?
Razor Ray Project.
Brunch?
Yep.
Jim, we might need to go.
I'm
Weber's? Ray
Is it indoors?
Weber's?
So Ray is now sophisticated in his old age, and he does lounge shows, and that's cool.
Now that my nut hairs are turning fucking white, I can do things like this.
Your fan base are now senior citizens, Ray, and they're eating at Weber's, and now they've
Well,
called.
you wanna?
Hey, man,
Okay,
some
all right. So you ask, how does this motherfucker get into this show? Get a gig like this? Well, it's funny, but I used to give guitar lessons to the Weber boys when they were younger. Kenny Weber's kids.
They know how awesome Ray is. Yep.
Now they're all grown up and they're running the place.
Makes sense.
That's how old I am. Yeah.
Well, he did a great job at the Botanical Company during the highway cleanup recently,
Thanks.
so that went really well too.
That was
If that's it, man, I think we're ready, and I think it was a great show, and I really appreciate everybody's participation and the good information today.
Great job, everyone.
Thanks a lot, you guys. See you later.
Nice
Jazz,
to meet you, Mike.
Take care, guys.
See you guys. Jazz
Thanks,
Cabbage
everyone.
Cafe, everybody. Thanks.
Much love. Smoke weed every day.